Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Employer Brand Insider. I am very excited for this one today because we're gonna get a little controversial. We're gonna hit some topics that might upset some of you guys. They might make you want to reach through the screen and not beat me up. You're gonna be beating Krystal up actually. So we have Krystal Hicks on the other line. She is the founder of JOBTALK, and I'll kind of, so what you do at JOBTALK is kind of two-part, right? So you're helping employees kind of get their stuff together and really figure out what it is they want and how to approach job seeking from that perspective. And then you also help out on the other side, right? So you're helping employers get their act together, tell their story, and really attract the right kind of people. Is that an accurate assessment, Krystal?
Yes, exactly. So helping job seekers and helping the companies that are trying to find job seekers. But I'm not a placement agency. A lot of people think I'm a headhunter. That's the term. And I kind of like to say that I teach people how to fish. I don't give them the fish. And with the companies, I'm teaching them how to attract the talent that they want, not just the talent that they're getting through their post and pray method or whatever's not working for them that they're experiencing.
That's interesting because most of the people I've talked to so far are on one side or the other. So I'm excited to dive into this stuff with you because I think that's a unique perspective that you have, you know, looking under the hood on both sides and really seeing like what both sides want. And, you know, you can speak both languages now, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's partly, it kind of came up organically when I first launched my practice 2 years ago. I was coming from corporate recruitment, so I had that experience of being on that side of the table, being in a hiring position, being the one who's sort of managing the search process. So when candidates click apply, I'm the black hole, right? When people feel like their resume just disappears into the black hole, like it's coming to me. So having that side of it, I think, is what makes working with job seekers even more fun, because then I'm kind of pulling back the curtain, letting them know what the process actually looks like, you know, what hiring managers really think of your cover letter. Are they reading it? Like all that kind of stuff. And working with companies just kind of came out of people calling me and that knew me in the job space. Jobs have been my job for about 12 years now. So I just have a lot of contacts. And so people that had reached out and said, hey, you know, I know you usually work with the candidates, but like our recruiter needs some help. Can you coach them? Or can you help us create a new interview process or something that feels better for the candidate, you know? So it's really fun. It's a nice mix.
Yeah, and it seems very smart of a company to, you know, reach out to somebody who has such close contact with job seekers on a regular basis, you know, because obviously it's important to communicate the things that they want and that they're interested in beyond salary, beyond, you know, the basic things that are part of a job. So that's cool. I mean, I think it's an interesting transition, and you know, I assume it must be very valuable to the companies you work with to have that insight.
Yeah, it's sometimes a tough conversation. You know, nobody wants to hear that they have an ugly baby. You know, and when you're looking at a company's career site, and if it doesn't tell me about your culture, if it doesn't seem competitive, I mean, candidates have a lot to choose from, you know, even during a pandemic, like there's still a lot of jobs out there. And I think that it's really important that employers don't lose sight of the fact that they need to be offering an experience that's competitive with what these candidates are seeing from other companies, whether it's benefits, whether it's, you know, the culture, whether it's flexibility. So sometimes employers don't want to hear, hey, you know, the fact that you're making people still wear like suits to work every day is kind of like old school, and like these aren't even customer facing employees. So like, why not let people be casual? It directly correlates on employee satisfaction surveys that this actually helps people feel more comfortable at work, be their authentic self. And sometimes employers are just very stuck in their ways with that stuff. Others are totally open and they're like, yep, easy fix, not a problem. So I like working with those companies.
Yeah, I would too. That makes a lot of sense. That'd be a little more attractive. But so in working with a lot of these companies, what are kind of the misconceptions or the things you see them getting wrong, the assumptions they have about what people want that turns out isn't true?
The companies that listen to candidates and actually survey their employees, they hear the feedback, right? Glassdoor, for example, right? We all know what Glassdoor is now. Employees or former employees can go and leave reviews on what it was like to work at a certain employer. The information is out there. Employer brand audits are something that I offer my corporate clients, and I've had companies reach out and say, we really need a lot of help with our employer branding. And so the first step is running this sort of audit. And so I will look at their entire online presence, and I'm looking at it through my recruiter view, but also through the candidate lens, and sort of trying to be the liaison between these two messages, right? So if I'm looking at a company's website and it's not easy to find a job or careers header or footer to get to the career site, this is like basic stuff, right? Like people need 3 clicks or less to get to what they're looking for. You're going to lose them. So like little things like that. How is the career at this organization even structured or talked about or articulated to the candidates? Do you talk about career progression? Do you talk about promoting internally? Do you talk about wanting to help your employees grow their own careers? Like if that language is missing, you're going to miss the mark with a lot of candidates that are very ambitious, especially this younger generation, right? Gen Z, they want to talk promotions. Growth to them comes in the forms of promotion, titles, more responsibility. It's not just about making more money. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a perfect example of something that if I'm a person of color, or if I'm a trans person and I don't see a shred of content on your career site or on your LinkedIn company page, your Instagram account, your Glassdoor, whatever, if you don't speak to me, I'm not going to feel super comfortable applying there. Like if I'm the only person that's going to have my shared lived experience in this organization, I'm automatically coming in feeling defensive or feeling like you're not going to understand me. So these are the things that sometimes companies, they don't know what they don't know. So there's an education process that I'm kind of going through with them, but it really is important that they have the right motivation as well, and that there's an appetite for real change. And real progression, because if, I could give you the best advice in the world, but if you don't want to follow it, or if it feels too cumbersome, or you can't get leadership on board, or it takes an act of Congress to change something on your website, I can't fix that. So.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, obviously you have to not just want to kind of do these things because they're becoming important or buzzwords or whatever. Like you have to actually want to make systemic change within your company, to do that kind of stuff. And I kind of but I get a little skeptical sometimes when I see companies talking about that stuff, and I'm like, is this marketing or is this like a real true objective? Are you really trying to figure this out and get ahead of it and get on top of it and truly care about it? So I wonder, like for you, are you seeing that, come in both forms, like people who really want to make the change and people who are just like, I need to be on top of this, we need to start this initiative or whatever? Absolutely.
I call it's performative allyship showing up in the workplace, basically, the corporate version of performative allyship. But what I equate this to is an organization that throws out a pride flag in an email correspondence to their employees, or puts a pride, something with like the rainbow up for Pride Month, But it's like, how are you supporting LGBTQ employees the rest of the year? Or like, are you only talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion work during Black History Month? Like, this is the stuff that really feels inauthentic and performative to the populations who are already marginalized, who are already kind of struggling to say like, hey, do you really care about me, right? Do you really care about what's going on in the rest of my life outside of work? What happened this summer with, the George Floyd murder was like such a perfect example. You have, Black and brown employees going to work who are feeling completely alienated because they're dealing with something so visceral, so personal, that even as white people, right, when we look at a situation and say, this is awful, if I'm a person of color, my proximity to that kind of trauma is so different than a white person who's having that experience. And so I think with companies that don't have the ability to have this authentic dialogue and a support system and the resources in place to support their employees of color or their trans employees or their employees that are managing a disability, right? There's a spectrum of employees that we're talking about here. And so I think it's really important for companies to remember that this isn't just, to your point, throwing up a person of color in a stock photo on your website and trying to claim that you're a very inclusive, company. Like, you need to be ready to have the real conversation with your employees and your candidates. And I have this conversation with recruiters all the time. Like, as a recruiter, like, we are the first round of defense, right, for that employee coming into a company. So if we can't have that conversation with someone, right, if I know that I'm talking to a candidate who's a person of color and they're going to be the only person of color on this team, I need to be able to have that conversation with someone and say, hey, listen, we're working on it. It's in progress, right? Our efforts are valid here, but we're not there yet. We still have some work to do, and you're going to be the first person who might have your lived experience like this on this team, and I need to know that you're okay with it because I want to set you up for success. I want you to know you're supported, and I don't want you to be blindsided, right? So it's multifaceted, but the effort and the resources, they have to start somewhere. And that's where, to your point, like, that authentic drive to create a real experience for people has to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that 100% too. And I think like it can come in a million different forms, right? You can take one approach or another approach, but I think having genuine effort being put into it's kind of obvious, right? Like, you can tell if it's a marketing thing once you get inside. It's like, well, you guys say this, but like, I don't see anything going on around here that represents what you were talking about,
Or I'm a black employee and I look around and there's no one else here that looks like me.
Right. Yeah. It's like, wait a minute. That thing on LinkedIn about, whatever.
Right. Yeah, I see other LGBT like Q employees and I'm like, oh, they're not out. Like they're not out at work. What does that say? That they don't feel comfortable to be their authentic self at work. Like, so there's a whole host of ways that this can show up in the first 30 days of someone actually taking the job and being like, ooh, maybe I made a mistake.
Yeah. So how do you have that conversation with the company that, wants to implement that and like make serious change within their organization, but they don't know how? Like, how do you direct them in that kind of situation?
It's a great question. I mean, I get the question all the time where it centers around talent, right? So the question will come to me, someone will send me an email or call me and say, hey, listen, we want to recruit more diverse talent. How do we do that? I'm in New Hampshire, right? So I live in New Hampshire. It's a very predominantly white state, predominantly white part of the country. And I think that it's really important that companies know that this is not a check the box type of approach, right? And that's where diversity has lived for a long time with a lot of companies in the worst way, right? It's just all about metrics. And so when people come to me and say, we want to recruit more diverse talent because that's going to make us a more inclusive work environment, it's like, no. Like, inclusion does not come from hiring more diverse employees. And I refuse to do that work with a company if they have not done the pre-work to that conversation. Meaning, have you actually hired a consultant who's a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, who is ideally a person of color or is, bringing with them people who can speak to this in first person? Have you done that work? Is your leadership on board? Does your CEO or head of HR even believe in what you're doing, right? Because this is a trickle down from leadership kind of initiative. This is not to be fully owned in HR. And so if people have done that work and there's true buy-in from leadership, I'm all about helping an organization become, really savvy with recruiting. Okay, let's talk about cold sourcing talent off LinkedIn. Let's go find the people you want. Let's not wait for them to come to us. Like, let's go after them. I'm happy to give all the strategies to those companies, but I am not going to give all my tricks to this organization that is essentially placing the burden of inclusion on the minority candidate that they are literally trying to hire into this company. Like, this is not their problem to solve, and it's inappropriate for HR or recruiters to put that on candidates, because this is not how that works, right? Like, the burden of change should not be on the person who's already being marginalized, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. No. So it is definitely a layered approach. And there are companies that I tell them they're not ready. You know, it's like, you're not ready for me yet. Like, you're still in the pre-work step. And here are a couple consultants that I really, truly love and recommend, and they'll do a great job, and it's worth the investment. And like, they're going to get your culture ready. They're going to make sure your leadership is on board, because it is a humbling experience. And I think especially if this is a conversation that no one's had internally yet, be humble and be ready to fumble, right? That was a great phrase. A friend of mine who teaches for the Attaway group, which is one of these awesome groups that I'm talking about, Erica Hines, and she was in Desiree Attaway, and they were like, be humble, be ready to fumble. Like, if you were a white person and you're talking about diversity, and they're both women of color, right? And so they're saying, like, you're going to mess some things up. And as leaders, as heads of HR, right, you're going to mess things up sometimes, but you need to own it. This is how you do it. This is how we work back from it. And this is how we keep the conversation going, right? So it's really important to have the right resources in place in order to get to that step where you're ready to actually start recruiting more diverse candidates.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I know that it can be a scary pool to dip your toe in, right? Especially coming from my background, you know, it's like, I don't, you know, it's a tricky thing to deal with. And like, obviously people deal with that fear of making a mistake, that fear of, you know, just doing the wrong thing or coming off the wrong way. And it's like, but however, that can't stop you from doing something about it, right? Because, you know, if you can't speak about it, like you said, go find the person who can, or, you know, bring someone in to help. But yeah, that's tricky.
If you're going to, real change comes from an uncomfortable place, my friend, right? So it's like, we got to simmer in this discomfort for a second. And if we're going to move the needle in any real way, we have to have that conversation. And so to your point, like analysis paralysis is such a real thing when it comes to this conversation, right? Especially in predominantly white companies or predominantly straight cis companies, right? Like, however you want to slice and dice diversity, it's hard for people who are coming from a more privileged place to have this dialogue. And so when people feel like, oh God, I don't want to offend anyone and say the wrong thing, therefore I'm not going to say anything, and therefore we're not actually moving the needle. So this whole idea around be humble and be ready to fumble, like, it's important to have someone come in as a consultant to help guide that conversation. But this is the stuff that companies need to do now. I mean, it's 2021. Candidates are not, I work with a lot of young people. I teach at the University of New Hampshire, a college to career course, and I hear it directly from students that they want to work for employers that are authentically inclusive, and it's a non-starter for them if they don't.
Obviously, like, diversity and inclusion is a huge, big thing to tackle for companies, and if people are there, good for them. Like, I feel like they must have a lot of their other stuff in a row before that. But I feel like there's even smaller, you know, things that companies are not dealing with and not addressing before they even get to that, you know, within their culture, within their, just the experience candidates go through applying and going through that process. So what other things do you see stand out a lot that companies are just getting wrong when it comes to hiring?
Oh, it's a great question. I think one challenge that's really been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic shift that we've all been experiencing is something I call managerial Darwinism, right? And I really think that this adapt or die mentality has to exist in management ranks these days, because, you know, managing from a distance, for example, right? If you're hiring managers that do not know how to manage from a distance and feel like they need to see their employees in order to manage them, that is a non-starter. Like, you have to have that skill set now, right? This is so important because micromanagement is one of the fastest growing cancers in a department, right? This is something that if you have a manager who is a micromanager and their people don't have autonomy, what does this all boil down to? Trust, right? Employees aren't going to feel trusted. And this also is exacerbated by the work from home, wave that we've all been dealing with. So it's like, okay, all of a sudden I have a manager that I feel like is a micromanager. I don't feel like they trust me. And now I have to work remotely. So they're either making me feel guilty about it, or they're not doing it well. And meaning I'm not getting the kind of support I need as an employee. So this is one of those big challenges that companies really have to say, are we hiring the right people into these management roles? And I truly think that for a long time, it's very common, right? If you're a great performer, right? You're an independent contributor, you have your job to do, you're really good at your job, and you perform and you produce whatever your role is, right? And you're great at it. You get promoted. But when you get promoted into the level where you're managing other people and you're responsible for the development of the people under you, that is a whole other skill set. And I do not think that just because you're a great producer, you should be managing other people and have their careers in your hands. It's a huge responsibility, and it's a very different skill set. So this is where managers have to really lean in, like leadership needs to lean in with managers and make sure they're promoting the right people, or create two different paths. Have a performance or production vertical where someone can grow their career and keep getting promotions as an independent contributor, and then have a people management structure and have great leaders manage the teams. But it's really, really tough because sometimes people want to think that they're a great people manager and they're not. And micromanagement slips in and they don't know what they're doing. And it's like, it really, the micromanagement waterfall, I call it, is when you typically have leadership that operates this way. So then their next tier feels micromanaged. So then they're really locking down on their people. So then they're micromanaging them. And all of a sudden it becomes embedded in the culture. And that's the problem. And this is the stuff that shows up in Glassdoor reviews. This is the number one reason why most people leave their job. When people say you don't leave a job, you leave a manager, this is usually one of the pieces of the puzzle there of why people are actually exiting organizations. So it's a very real issue that companies struggle with, especially with legacy players. Someone's been a phenomenal employee for the last 10 years, get promoted into a people management position, all of a sudden they need a lot of coaching. That's a hard conversation. You got to invest in bringing in an executive coach for someone, or really have human resources invest in training and development specialists so that they can work with these people and build out the skill set.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I like the idea of kind of setting up two different tracks or something, because I think a lot of people, and I've been in this situation where it's like, there's really only one way to go beyond where I'm at here. Yeah. And that is to move into management. But, like you're saying, not everyone's cut out for that. Not everyone even, aside from pushing their career forward, even cares about doing that. Like leadership is, you kind of have to want that. And, it's a lot of responsibility, and, you just have to have a certain mindset to even want to lead a team, Yeah. But if that's your only way up, then you're going to do it because.
Right. Exactly. And for a lot of people, they don't want to leave their organization. They want to keep growing their career where they are, right? So it's like, why should I have to leave my company to grow my career? And this is where a lot of companies, especially when they're in startup mode, or they only have so many layers, they're a pretty flat organization, it is hard to grow people. And even when I'm talking to my one-on-one job seeker clients, right, and someone says something about like, I really want to go to an organization where I can grow. And it's like, define growth for me. Because if you put 3 different people in front of me, so I will get 3 different definitions of growth. One person says, well, I want to make more money. Valid. I want a new title. I've been in the same title for 5 years, right? I want more responsibility. Like, growth looks really different for different people. So it's really important. A good friend of mine said a long time ago, understand what you value, right? And I come back to that all the time with clients. And it really comes up in this example, like, what is it that you actually want out of this growth that you're asking for? And I think that that's something that people have to also learn how to self-advocate for, because your manager might not know. They might have a totally different definition of growth in their mind. So it's important for people to ask for what they want, and especially dealing with a multi-generational workforce. Great book called The Remix by Lindsay Pollack, who I absolutely adore. And it's all about how this is the first time in history we've ever had a 5-generation workforce. So when you're talking about like people wanting to grow, trust me, the career path of a boomer looks totally different than a career path of a Gen Zer. And back in the day, you used to have this climb the ladder mentality, right? So it's like climb the ladder, one step after the other. That's not necessarily what Gen Z wants, or even millennials. I mean, I'm an older millennial, so it's like this lattice work. You know, Lindsay Pollock talks about it as like maybe go over here, try something over here, and I want to try this over here. There's this feeling of I want to know more about the space I'm in. So that's another big challenge that companies face is how do we give people the experiences and the project and the cross-functional collaboration that they want, right? But without necessarily changing job titles every 6 months or throwing more money at people every 6 months. So, you know, it's all, every company has their own issues, you know, and no company's perfect. So that's another thing I always tell my clients. It's not like the grass is greener everywhere. It's like you really need to learn how to self-advocate and ask for the things that you want. And then if that's not coming or it's not the right fit, then go ahead and know that it's time to go.
Yeah. I wonder what that actually looks like, you know, inside of a company. I don't know if you've helped anybody go through that transition, but, you know, I've been in a situation where I've been in a company and it's like, hey, you know, like we want to keep our people around, you know, so if you don't like this, like we'll shuffle you around, we'll find a spot for you. But in reality, when you get to that point and you're like, I'm ready to mix it up, it's like, well, you know, it takes a whole lot of shuffling and we got stuff to do. We don't have time to like put you in your ideal spot. You know, it's kind of the way it comes across. So have you gone through that? Have you coached people and helped them implement kind of systems or approaches to include that in, you know, their culture?
Yeah, a really good example of that would be when I worked at Lindt Chocolate, the little Lindt chocolate ball. So their U.S. headquarters is right in New Hampshire. Great organization, and they have what's called career pathing. And a lot of larger organizations have career pathing models. So this is where, as an employee, if you come in as a accounts receivable rep, right, you should be able to see where you can actually take your job. And if you decide to go over here, but it's really about starting that conversation with people right from when they're hired to say, hey, a year from now, if you feel like you want more exposure to another side of the business, like come back to us and let us know so that we can help you start to like join special project teams or collaborate on cross-functional programming that we're setting up or whatever it may be, so that you can even start to network with the people in those departments and see if that's a fit for you. But I think that is something that companies have to, it's an investment. I mean, my colleagues in HR that worked on this career pathing program, it is a labor of love, but it's really worth it. And it's really something that's really where, you know, you can see a company putting their dollars where their promises are, right? And saying, hey, we're investing in this program. What do you think of it? And as soon as you join our organization, we're going to talk about what your promotions are going to look like. And we want this to be an open dialogue. We don't want you to feel like you can't come to us and say, hey, I actually want to try a different job soon. I worked with a coworker at Lindt who he was a packaging engineer. And packaging engineering, it's like people that are making the cardboard carrots for the chocolate bunny cars, like during Easter. And it's like they get these it's like art, graphic design, engineering, and marketing all put together. That's packaging engineering, right? And he went back to school and he got his MBA and he said, you know, I really feel like I want to be a brand manager. I want to make the shift over to marketing. And so it was a big conversation. He's leaving two totally different, you know, worlds, right? He's leaving engineering to come over to marketing. And it was great. I mean, it was an open conversation. His boss was supportive, right? But we did it over the course of like a 6 to 12 month plan that worked for everybody, but we were able to do that. And he moved into that position and he's doing great on the marketing team still, like 2-3 years later. So it's one of those things where when companies work with employees, they're going to retain their top talent, you know, and that talent is going to be so thrilled that they're working with a company that's supporting them in this move and they don't have to exit the company to make this move. So it really is something that takes a lot of trust. I'm going to keep coming back to that. It's such a real thing. You know, if your employees don't trust you, they're not going to come to you with this. They're just going to leave.
Especially like you mentioned before with this transition to remote, you can go get a job anywhere in the world, you know, and if you're half decent at what you do, you have a million options of places to work now, right? So companies are really going to have to, step up their game, if they don't want to be picking through the scraps at the bottom, right?
It's funny. I think the benefit leans towards certain companies more so than others with this move. So if you think about the national remote search, right? If I'm a job hunter and I say, I live here in New Hampshire, but I'm open to working for a company in Seattle, I don't care about the time change, right? I just want to work 100% from home. So that means that I can apply anywhere. But when I apply, I'm actually up against national talent. So I'm competing against a much broader pool because the employers that are smart enough, I am totally going to say this, if you are smart enough to see that by letting your people, trusting your people to work remote 100% of the time, you're now affording yourself the ability to recruit from the entire country. So now you have a much broader talent pool that you can actually be sourcing from. The companies that are not going to benefit from this are the companies that are very old school, that are stuck in their ways, that are refusing to find ways of letting their employees work from home, which again, I think COVID, as awful as it has been, the silver lining here in the employment space is that COVID has really forced the hand of some of these very old school, non-conforming companies. And this is, again, Darwinism in its truest form, right? Like, there was no option. Like, if you want to keep your doors open as an organization, figuratively speaking, you need to let your people work from home because it's not safe for them to come in. So now you have employees that have this ability to say, hey, I've been doing my job for the last 12 months remotely. Don't tell me that there's no way for me to keep doing this, even if it's like 3 days a week or 2 days a week, right? But to now come back and say, I don't get any more flexibility, now that kind of COVID dust is settling and people are vaccinated, the problem with this whole thing is now that attitude is going to seem punitive. Like, oh, you're beating me up now, making me come into the office 5 days a week when I've literally been doing my job from home. So help me understand why I'm not able to keep doing that even for a couple days a week. So those companies that refuse to bend on that, this is where that adapt or die mentality comes in. Like, you need to be flexible with people. Also, I think these companies and these managers need to really kind of like hold up the heavy mirror and be like, what is the problem here? Like, why do I have such a problem with somebody working from home? Hire people that you trust to work from home. If an employee is showing you that they're not being productive, measure their productivity. And if they're not productive and they're slacking off because they're working from home, fire them and hire someone that you can trust to work remotely. But taking away the privilege for that flexibility from everybody because you don't trust someone or because you don't trust yourself and how you would be if you were working from home in their shoes, that's not an excuse any longer.
It's crazy. I think I haven't seen numbers to support this or really even looked into it, but just kind of looking around, seeing like my friends and people online, a lot of people have changed changed companies that they work for in the last 6, 7, 8, like a year,
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like that's going to keep happening, right? As companies start going back to the office and they start saying like, all right, we're going back to the old ways. People have just become so accustomed to this way of life now that it's like, no, I don't think I want to go back to that. I'm not. Why, So
and
just kind of to support your point, it's like,
yeah, and some people are like, hey, I miss my coworkers. Like, I would, my kids are home remote. My spouse is in the same house. I am crazy at home. I can't wait to get back into the office. Like, there's definitely going to be that population, right? But this is where it's like, going back to Lindsay Pollock's book, she says, one size fits none. So these companies that are out here trying to make these one size fits all policies, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like, this isn't even realistic. Like, why? Like, give people flexibility, hire people that are professionals, and let them do their job, And I think that it will be very interesting to see what happens as the market continues to soften, because to your point, there's a lot of movement right now. Vaccines are out, right? We're in March now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think, it's definitely something that employees are going to wrestle with if companies are being too strict about that move back. I mean, flexibility is key right now.
I know people can be really stubborn, and part of me thinks like, great, this is an awesome transition, an awesome opportunity, and then another part of me is like, how often do you see leadership look themselves in the mirror and say like, you know what, we do need to change, you know what, like we could do better, we could do things differently, so I hope, I'm optimistic that it's at least possible for people to kind of say like, okay, like we do need to do something about this. We do need to change or whatever. But, we'll see, I guess. We'll see how that plays out.
And like you said, a lot of people are in transition. I've been saying if you weren't in transition prior to COVID, you probably are now. So there's a lot of people that did take that jump and that risk who didn't get laid off, who didn't get furloughed. They were totally employed and they still chose to make some changes and to leave their organization and go elsewhere in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that, this is what's really hard, and there's so many people. I mean, obviously I have so many clients that I've worked with this year, right, that were laid off and were affected by, and companies that were affected by COVID. And I think it was a really introspective year for people to kind of look inwards and be like, am I even doing what I really want to do? And if I was going to make a change, maybe this is the time to make it. And I think it's important that, especially if there's job seekers out there watching this, to know that the recruiters right now, the hiring space is so much more empathetic than in 2008. I worked in staffing in 2008. I think for every job order I had 400 candidates, and it was brutal. It was just so brutal. There was so much animosity in the market. People were angry because there was manipulation going. I mean, just look at what got us there, But this is so different, and people are truly like we're on the same boat, And so I think that it's important for people to remember that, like, it's okay if you have a gap on your resume now. It's okay if you had to take a step back. And the numbers around women leaving the workforce right now it's just horrifying. I read a stat the other day that like we're back to like the 1980s stats of women in the workplace just because of how many stepped back during all this to stay home with their kids. And like, whether you have a dual income or not, but having to make that decision where one of your incomes is stepping out to watch your kids and deal with the remote schooling is just a really, resilience is imperative now. Like you have to be resilient to get through this, but it's hard when you feel like you're running a marathon and the finish line keeps moving.
I was just having a conversation the other day about how COVID has affected women in the workplace. And I didn't even really realize, but it's something I didn't think about is like staying home actually could be kind of a negative experience for women because they're kind of expected to work, be professional, do the family thing at the same time. And, not being able to go back to work and separate those things and not being able to get the face time with leadership and management and stuff like that actually is kind of makes it more difficult for them to progress careers and, things like that. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's like, it's things like that, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and stuff, it's like, that's a situation I never would have put those 10 puzzle pieces together to like realize that. But, hearing the stories about it, I'm like, wow, there's so many different side effects from all this stuff that just need to be talked about, right? I mean, the discussions just need to be out there.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think, I always encourage people, especially when we're talking about diversity in any sense, but, women, a lot of the the female clients that I work with or folks that identify as women, there is such a real pressure that if you are a career focused woman that you put on yourself because there's so many shoulds that come with that, right? Well, you should just stay. Oh, you don't like your job. You know how good your title is, you know how far breaking that glass ceiling, making it up there, right? You should just stay. You should just be happy with what you have, don't rock the boat. That became exacerbated with COVID. Like, you should be able to do both. You should be able to have your kids remoting into school and you're on the other side of the kitchen island, remoting into work. Like, you should be able to do it all. And it's like, it just broke people, right? And I think there's so many women that battle that, and it's such a real, side effect of the gender pay gap, the equity gap that's existed for women in the workplace for so long. And I think that's why it's so depressing sometimes to see this stat, to see how many women have left the field this year it's heartbreaking, And I put the onus on companies for this stuff. Like, we have got to stop putting this, punitive measurement on the gaps on resumes. Like, if you had to step out of the workforce to have kids, start a family, like, that shouldn't be seen as a negative thing, right? Like, if you can still punch back in, do your job, roll with it, 12 months later, 18 months later, 24 months later, this should be a non-issue, right? But yet there is such a real, like, well, it's been a while since she's done it. How is she going to, the systems change so quickly. It's like 2 years, really? Like, we're talking about she's not going to come in here and hit the ground running and be thrilled to be back to work. She's literally going to work so much because she's so psyched to be back to work,
Right.
Or like, not even with just women, but anybody, aging parents, again, dealing with a 5-generation workforce for the first time. Think of how many people are stepping out of work to take care of an aging parent, and this includes men. Like, people having to opt for that gap on the resume to, like, go do this stuff. So I just think that there is a lot more empathy and compassion that I think recruiters are showing for people. I've had so many clients that have interviewed that were so worried about an 8-month gap because they got furloughed and then laid off and all this kind of stuff back in, like, June or March of last year. Mm-hmm. And they get through an interview and they call me and they're like, oh my God, they didn't even ask about the gap. How did they not ask about the gap? And I'm like, because they know what's going on. Like, there's a 99% chance that if you're unemployed from March of 2020 to current, COVID might have had something to do with it, right? So It's just, we got to get past that and remember, like, we're all human, we're all dealing with this stuff, but companies really have to own this because they set the tone for how those recruiters are going to act, for what the filters are going to be, the hiring managers. Like, we have to stop putting that onus to explain all the gaps and stuff on the candidate or to make up for those gaps when they were stepping out to deal with life. Life happens.
That whole conversation just now makes me think of something that I'm pretty passionate about and I have pretty strong feelings about when it comes to the recruitment process and how ridiculous it is to look at a piece of paper and say, like, yep, got a pretty good gist of this person. Like, I don't think they're going to fit. It's just, I mean, I understand that there's, it's a complicated process, right? Like, it's not an easy fix, but it just seems ridiculous to me that, you can take 400 or 500 applicants for a role and say, like, yep, these 4 are probably, the ones. And it's just like, I don't know. There's no human element to it. And I just don't see how people can expect to find somebody who clicks with their organization and clicks with what they have going on when the first time someone's being human to you is maybe after you're hired. I don't know.
Yeah. And this is where rec tech comes in, recruiting technology. I love some of the rec tech that's coming out. You have pre-recorded video interviewing, right? You have, like, which is a better way of screening someone. I'm working with a corporate client right now who is a small enough organization, so they don't have a recruiter in-house. So when they have openings, I kind of help them just with the process pieces. And so when you apply, if your resume comes in and if you meet the specs of what they're looking for, even closely, right, I can send you a link, and it's a pre-recorded video interview with like 5 or 6 questions built in. And it gives you the chance to talk on video and to, like, answer these questions in kind of a low pressure way. And then the hiring manager gets all these videos back and can really kind of suss out, like, oh, like, I love that story they told, or, like, the first time and the thing is, recruiters, so I see the resumes before the hiring manager sees anybody. So they're getting the video along with the resume. So all of a sudden, if the resume really didn't do someone as much justice, the video, they might have really come to life in the video, and vice versa. I've seen really strong resumes and the person was just not, there was no energy. They weren't excited. There was, they're flopping the answers, And so I feel like it's a much better way of candidates getting that chance. I always tell my clients, make a video cover letter, make a virtual resume and throw it on your LinkedIn profile. I mean, literally, like if you feel like you need a better way of standing out than your resume, go do it. Like there's no excuses anymore. Technology is on your side for this,
I also believe, though, that companies aren't doing enough to ask people to stand out or to encourage them to stand out. Like if you're just asking for resumes, even with the video, that's fine. But if somebody's not saying like, tell me about yourself or whatever, or your job experience, but like, how can they promote the idea of like, what are you into? Like, what do you want? What do you, things that are more human than just like the basic stuff we're all used to seeing. I think some of the responsibility falls on them to promote like, hey, be unique, be different, like do whatever is uniquely yourself,
And that's employer branding right there, right? So like if you're a company and you say that on your career site, right? Like we like hiring people from all walks of life. We like hiring people from all backgrounds. We like hiring people like, hey, if you're a mom and you stepped out of the workforce to raise your kids for a few years, we've got a returners program. HubSpot, great company. They have a returners program. So if you've been out of the workforce for up to like 8 years or something like that, you can actually come in and apply for this special program, which is like a skills training program. And then you're plugged right into roles within HubSpot. It's so cool. Like, this is what companies need to be doing, right? Like they do a really good job of kind of what you're saying, like giving a different way in for maybe candidates that might not have the best resume or might have gaps. Something else to what you said too is, I think it's tough because there's a lot of lines for employers and recruiters around what can be asked and can't be asked. And during an interview, legally, I can't ask a whole bunch of things. So it's really tough sometimes for that line for someone when there's legality involved, right? Of like, I have to stay very on brand here for this role. Like if I start asking you questions that have nothing to do with your ability to do the job, you could then claim that I was discriminating you against for whatever your answer was, and it had nothing to do with the role. So there's a lot of sticking points for this stuff, right? So if companies start saying, send us a video, right? Then people might say, well, you're not even seeing my resume yet. You're not even like, are you just judging me on how I look? Like this is a whole other thing, right? I mean, you look at Europe, instead of resumes, they call them CVs, and you actually have a headshot on your CV. You have your age, you have your number of children you have, possibly their names and ages. It's like, makes my skin crawl as a recruiter.
Just sounds like a lawsuit
much
to you.
Discrimination. Yeah. But yet you would never do that in America, But this is just the cultural norms here mixed with the laws. It is kind of limiting sometimes for employers. So I always tell candidates, the person who winds up getting the job these days, it is not the best person on paper. Trust me. For a million different reasons, the best candidate doesn't get the job. It's usually a great candidate that knew how to stand out from all the other great candidates, because there always will be. The volume is always going to be there. And to your point with recruiters, it's really tough because the volume is never on our side, right? If I think back, I'll give you an example. When I was in corporate, I would have at any given time between 15 and 30 open recs, open jobs. If I have 30 open recs, that means I'm probably working with like 20 to 25 different hiring managers on those 30 openings. That's a lot of coordination. That's a lot of scheduling. For each of those recs, I have between 1 and 200 candidates. And if I only have one opening for that role, and let's take one role. Let's say it's a brand manager position, and you're a brand manager, right? And you apply, and you had a great background. If even, let's say 100 people apply, if even 20% of those people are just as qualified as you, you're still battling 19 other people for a first round phone screen with me. And I might not phone screen all 20 candidates. A recruiter's job completely centers around efficiency. I need to make the right hiring decisions and screening decisions the first time around and as quickly as possible. Because I have 30 other jobs like this waiting. It's like, crazy the number that recruiters are having to deal with. I knew hospital recruiters that had 60 open recs at any given time. It's just wild. So it is so important to stand out. You don't have to be the best, but it's important to stand out.
It seems like there's a lot of pressure to fill these positions. Like in that example, you've got 30. Like, what's more important? Is it important to put the right person in that job, or is it more important to fill the role quickly? Because, I mean, I know the answer. I think we both know the answer. Everyone knows the answer. Like, you're going to be hiring for that role again if you make a mistake there. So, like, I totally get what you're saying, and it makes sense, but,
Yeah. No, it's a very valid question. Yeah, no, it's a valid question. And time to fill is a metric that most recruiters are measured against. And I've always hated this metric because, to that exact point, like, so you're telling me that it's more important for me to fill this job quickly than to fill it with the right person, right? Mm-hmm. But the right organizations, and luckily my VP of HR was great with this. And she said, listen, the metric is simply a measurement of time, right? I'm not measuring your value based on that metric. I absolutely want to see us hiring great people that have potential to grow and like career progression moves that they could make in this organization from this one role, right? You're never hiring a person for this role, you're hiring them for the next role, that kind of thing. So she was really good about that with me, but I know other recruiters that absolutely work in those environments where their managers are running reports on them, how many recs are still open every week, how long is it taking them to fill, and that is quantity over quality, and that's never going to work because you're dealing with people. And I totally agree with you. I think fit is so huge, right? And I mean fit as in like finding someone who can really do the job, who brings different perspectives to the table. But sometimes it's really hard. And, sometimes you go all the way through a search process and you've got someone that you love. And then you get to the point of making an offer and they accept some other job. And you start all over again. And it's like, the human element here is real. And it affects every variable in the process.
Yeah. And I admit that sometimes I can kind of look at the, recruiting process and stuff and kind of put more issue with like the the process and what they're doing to recruit. I understand like as a person looking for a job, you also need to own your part of it. And, if you want to stand out, there's a lot more you can do as well, because like me for like this podcast, for example, it's like any individual has, especially if you're really good at whatever your skill is, you can make stuff like this, there are ways for you to stand out as a candidate, it's a tech world, you know what I mean? Like you could literally stand out among everyone, but you also have to put the work in, so I don't mean to say like the recruiting process is broken and they're the only ones who can fix it, but
yeah, there's a sense of ownership that comes into it. But I mean, I think I empathize for the job seeker in this position because I work with clients all the time that, I tell them like jobs are my job. I don't expect you to know any of this stuff. This is my job. This is why I do this, right? Because I do see that there's an educational component here and you don't know what you don't know, especially if you've been working in the same company. Oh God, I work with so many clients that are just so loyal to their company that they should have left forever ago because they're being, they're staying at their own expense. And they finally get to the point where they reach out to me and we're talking through it. And they're like, I've just been with this organization for so long. I don't even know how to job hunt. Like, I don't even know what my resume look like. I don't even remember if I have a resume. Like, it's been so long. And so I really empathize for people that they don't know how to move through this process, let alone stand out. Like functionally, they don't know how to move through and they think, oh, well, I'm just going to apply for some jobs, click apply, right? That is not job hunting. That's simply clicking an apply button, right? Mm-hmm. Like another way of standing out, 98% of people don't follow up after they apply for a job. 98%. And that is not an arbitrary stat that I'm pulling from some article. This is like from my experience, right? So if out of 100 candidates, 2 follow up with me, preferably through LinkedIn, I'm going to then spend more, in one click, I'm on their LinkedIn profile, right? So then I'm spending more eyeball time on their information than anybody else in that applicant tracking system who might have better experience than them, who might have more experience than them. But I'm not looking at them right now. I'm looking at these two candidates. And that is the big thing that I always tell people is like, you have to follow up when you're applying for a job. Because you're not following up to be like, hey, did you get my application? Did it come through the system? You're going to get the little automated email that everybody gets, and it's like, thanks, we've received your information, and someone will call you if you're a good fit. No. You're calling to follow up to stand out from the crowd. It's a saturated market. There is a lot of talent on the market right now at no fault of their own, right? Times are crazy. So if you want to stand out, like, you have to take these measures, right? Gaining LinkedIn recommendations. That's another big thing, right? If I look at your profile, you're always going to tell me that you're awesome. I need other people to tell me that you're awesome. Like, so these are the little things that can make a huge difference in someone searching, just getting that first phone call or not.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And, I guess on both sides, right? Like whether you're looking for a job or you're looking to hire talent, there's a spectrum, right? And it's like, how competitive do we want to be? Like, what tier are we after, And if it's up here, we have to be competitive and we have to do the things necessary to compete for that talent or compete for that role at that company. Mm-hmm. And I guess as long as you have sat down and thought about it and said, like, you know what, we're not going to do all this crazy stuff to like activate an employer brand, blah, 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 blah. That's fine as long as you're okay knowing like, okay, well, here's what you should expect in that case then, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying like, you know what, we're fine. It's pretty simple jobs and, we're not looking for anyone
You can do the bare
crazy.
minimum. Yeah, you can do the bare minimum these days. You'll get people that apply, but there's a really big difference. So one of the things that I used to do when I was in corporate is I had a recruiter seat in LinkedIn, which is a special tool that recruiters can use. And it gave me access to all 700 million people on LinkedIn, not just my first, second, and thirds. And I had 35 different search filters that I could drill down. So I would go fishing for people. So my hiring managers would tell me who their unicorn was, right? I want someone with this experience and these skills and went to this school and all these things. And I said, okay, well, let's post a job description. Let's see who we get in. And we would get hundreds of applicants, right? 45% of the time, 45% out of all, I hired roughly between 65 and 80 people a year, depending on the year. 45% of those external people coming into our company, so not the internal promotions and stuff, but almost half of the people that I was hiring, I was pulling cold off LinkedIn. Literally fishing on LinkedIn, sending messages, running these searches, finding the people, and reaching out. So I always tell people, like, make sure you answer those messages from those recruiters on LinkedIn, because a lot of times I'd be finding these people. They're still competing against the people that applied, right? They still have to be the best candidate to get the job. But a lot of times, 45% of the time, those were the people getting the job. So it's a really good example of how job descriptions don't always do it for you. Job descriptions might find some people that could certainly do the job. That is one thing that if anyone watching this gets anything out of this discussion, right? There are so many people that can do the job that apply that don't get the job because there's only one opening. And that's the problem. When there's only one opening, it is always dealer's choice. It is always, always, always going to be the employer's choice of who they're plugging into that role, because they will probably have more volume that they can choose from and lots of people who could do the job. And then it really boils down to, okay, well, if all 20 people here can do this job, why do we choose the one person that we choose that gets the offer? Sometimes it's not even looking at all 20 people. It's just, again, having someone that knows how to stand out from that pack, who can also do the job, who just happen to have a great attitude, who is proactive, right? Again, following up. You're not brown nosing. You're literally demonstrating the attributes that I want to hire in someone. You're being proactive and you're taking initiative and you're not afraid to reach out and go after what you want. Those are the attributes you're going to bring to the job. That's what I want working for me. So it's like, people just sometimes have to step out of the candidate shoes and step into the recruiter shoes sometimes. And like, really remember, this is a human process. Most recruiters are very nice. They want to respond to everybody, right? They try. Some recruiters are awful and don't respond, and there's a special place in hell for those recruiters. But I really think that like most candidates should expect a pretty friendly recruiter when they reach out. But it's definitely, you gotta go the extra distance.
Something I thought about when you were saying that is, I'm sure you've heard this idea of like, you just need one applicant, right? You just need one applicant. That's the ideal number to fill a position, right? Like, why do you need 10,000? So obviously that's just kind of an exaggerated example to demonstrate an idea, but what do you think about having an approach maybe with your employer branding, maybe with the way that you're going after candidates that limits the number of people that you're actually looking at, limits, instead of these big open job postings, you know, taking a different approach? Like, have you had situations where you have used an approach like that with clients instead of just a big, you know?
I did have an example or a situation for a company that I was working with in Massachusetts, which was a medical technology company. And they actually said to me, we get a lot of volume, but not a lot of quality. And we would actually like to find ways of, you know, basically refining either the tools or the job description, the asks, you know, that we're putting out there, because we kind of want to be a little bit, we want people to be able to self-select in or self-select out, right? Instead of applying and just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Like, so this is a situation where we had to be radically candid about what they're looking for, what are the success attributes, right? Like certain things, we used to call this price of admission competencies, right? Price of admission, out the gate, what do you need to come into this organization and do well, right? These are the competencies. And then the next layer is sort of like, okay, what are these extra things that are the success criteria that are going to really lead to someone being dynamite and have that stretch potential to be able to get promoted in the future, right? So I had to really help them nail down, like, what are these criteria in order to refine this job description, because the job descriptions were so vague. Like they posted a job and it was like, you know, marketing coordinator. And it was so vague. And I'm like, you don't even tell me the systems you guys work with, right? Like, add more requirements instead of preferences. Like, you know, but you can also lace in the language that you really, you know, I said, like, give me an example of something that you're just finding a lot of people that come in and they don't have something, or it's a mismatch. And they said, oh, you know, we've just hired a lot of people that have attitudes and they don't get along with people. And I'm like thinking to myself, well, this is a screening issue, but why don't you put in the job description, like, must play well in the sandbox, like, must get along with others, like, don't be a jerk. You know, there was this great company in Portsmouth that's now, they were bought by someone else, but one of their recruiters, she told me that she's like, one thing that basically the president told me was, we don't hire jerks here. So you're the personality recruiter. And she's like, and that's what I'm known as. She's like, I hunt for nice people. You know, you gotta be qualified. You gotta be able to do the job. But like, if you're a jerk, I'm just gonna say this isn't the right place for you. And I think companies have to get used to having that candid of a conversation with people and with themselves too, and put it in paper, put it in the job description, put this stuff out on your, you know, have this be a part of your employer brand. Like, essentially people are wondering, why do I want to come work for you? Why should I want to? You know, answer that question for people, be specific.
Yeah. I mean, I love that idea. And I think it's important to, like, the idea of weeding people out is good, right? Like, you want to weed people out of that process. And if you can do that in a way that's...
You have to.
Right, yeah. I mean,
I got one
you
opening.
can only hire one person, you know, you can only hire one person. So, like, instead of dealing with 100 applicants, you know, obviously, like, in a job description, like you're saying, there's already... all the job requirements are weeding people out, right? But I think I don't see it very often where they're weeding it out based on, like, somebody's success in a role isn't just about whether they know Photoshop and this and that or whatever, you know. It's like character makes, I think, a bigger difference in someone's success than, what skills they have. Skills,
Absolutely.
you can learn those, but I don't see very often, job descriptions that are weeding people out based on character, and I think
there's
they
certain
should.
companies that do, and you notice them right off the bat because the job descriptions feel so different, right? They almost feel like controversial, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like HubSpot's another example. I think right in their job descriptions, they actually have a line that says, you know what, we understand that there's no perfect fit for every job. So even if this is something that you're highly interested in and you're not sure if you're a good fit, apply anyway. Like, we want to see you. Like, it's so candidate friendly, that's huge. Like, talking to someone like they're a real person, not having like a just standard auto messages, not doing like the batch rejections, right? Like having like more personalized emails that even say to people like, hey, you know what, you weren't the right fit for this position, but investing in a system perhaps that like saves the resumes so that you can tag them for future positions. Like, hey, you weren't the right fit for this position, but we actually might have something that opens up later on. So I'm saving your resume and I really appreciate you taking the time and applying. Like, that message goes so far with candidates because I've sent stuff like that to people and they're like, thank you. The number of candidates that have thanked me for even just responding to them tells me how rampant the lack of response is from recruiters, which is unfortunate. And if you are not going to take the time to respond to people, especially when they ask you for feedback, like, go find another job. As far as I'm concerned, responding is part of the job. And when only 2% of people actually follow up, especially on LinkedIn, like, you got time. Like, I've been a team of one and drowning, and I still found time to respond to people. Did I miss a few in there? Probably. I'm not perfect, but like, it's really important that there's a concentrated effort to be a better recruiter, to have a better candidate experience, right? Because something that I learned, working for a consumer goods company like Lindt, it was like, I don't want to have a candidate have a bad experience. What if they hate the brand after and they never buy our chocolate again? Like, one hand washes the other with this stuff, right? Like, I'm an environmentalist. I'm not going to go work for Monsanto. Like, the things that we care about impact the decisions we make about the companies we want to work at, and vice versa. So candidate experience is so, so, so huge.
Right. And, it's like, it's kind of obvious, right? Like, if you're asking people to be good people to come work at your company, like, you got to give a little bit of that too, right? You can't just expect these like great people who are amazing at what they do. They're really great people. They have natural leadership qualities.
Yeah.
And you can't even respond to a email or take the time to like tell somebody. It's like, it's crazy,
Yeah.
but it's a problem. It's like everywhere,
Just make it easier, right? And something that you had said earlier that made me think of this was, what can recruiters and companies do to encourage people to stand out more, right? So that it's like, not just like, okay, fill out this, application and then you're in. But the other kind of side to that coin is applicant tracking systems now. I remember when I implemented a system and we also had a retail population at Lindt, so folks that work at the retail store. So that means you might have a lot of employees that are applying from their phone. Like, so many people apply to jobs right on their phone. Is your application mobile responsive? Is it quick and easy? Like, good God, if you make me upload my resume, then copy stuff into fields, and then it's forcing me to upload a cover letter. Like, if you're not reading cover letters, don't require them. You know what I mean? Like, that's another thing that kills me about companies. And people are like, oh, they didn't submit a cover letter. And I'm like, you don't even read them anyway, John. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so it's just one of those things where I really think that companies have to get real about what they're asking for from people and tier their application process. Just require the bare minimum, whatever you actually need from someone up front to get them in. And then if you see their information and they put in a cover letter or whatever it is, and then you kind of like slice it down to that top 20%, all right, now have those people fill out the rest of the application so you can get the demographic information that you need, right, and the legal stuff. But God, like the processes are way too long. They're too cumbersome. Like, people are just going to fall off. And that's what we would see when our applications were too long. We could track the fall off rate at what point in that application they were falling off. And it's like, you could be losing really good talent because of that.
Yeah, I know. You see those metrics of like average resume gets looked at for 6 seconds. And then I forget the percentage, but like how many people abandon an application because it's just a pain in the ass process, you know? And it's like, you're literally glancing at it anyways and putting it in this pile or this pile. Like, just like you're saying, just get what you need to weed me out or move me on to the next stage, you know? But
or give people the option. Be like, you can submit a resume, or you can submit your LinkedIn profile, or you can send us a virtual resume, right? Send us a 3-minute video talking about your experience. Like, whatever, right? You're probably still going to need to collect the resume eventually or collect these other things eventually. But like, even just giving people an option, you know, especially if someone has a disability or accessibility issues, like that could be really great. You know, if you're dyslexic, you know, like I've worked with a lot of clients where they're like, God, even like dealing with my resume is a nightmare because I'm dyslexic. I'd love to just talk to somebody though, right? If I talk to them, I'd be able to like get to know, like they'd be able to get to know me a little bit more. And then I could actually feel more comfortable talking to them about this or sharing a resume and being like, hey, just FYI, like, you know, so there's just a lot to it. There's a lot of layers.
Yeah, well, that's a super good point, and I hope it resonates with people because there's going to be a lot of applications coming inbound for a lot of people real soon.
Yeah.
So hopefully they can streamline that stuff. And we're just about wrapping up here, and we've covered a lot of really awesome stuff, so I really appreciate everything so far. One thing I just kind of touch on at the end is just a little prediction of the future. You know, obviously you're pretty plugged into, you know, all of this stuff. And, you know, we talked about diversity and inclusion being a huge thing coming up soon. Already is, you know, really making steps forward. Is there anything else? Like, what do you think is going to be, you know, something that people can get ahead of now, something people can think about and start taking steps towards, you know, that some of the biggest and best are going to be focused on in the next couple of years?
I think that the virtual component is here to stay. I think COVID really solidified it, right? Zoom is just like a verb now, right? We're Zooming. It's like you might be using GoToMeeting or WebEx or something, but we're still calling it Zoom. There's just some things that have been built into our social structure now. And so I think people need to be very ready for video interviews. This used to be something that was only done if somebody was like out of the office or it was a remote position, like a sales position or something. It is absolutely like the standard now. So I think people just really needing to get comfortable. It's like public speaking, right? Public speaking is one of those skills that a lot of people kind of work on. They join Toastmasters, they sign up to do a TED Talk, like whatever it may be. If you have a hard time talking like this, right? Like podcasts are a great opportunity to practice this. I also think of apps like Marco Polo or even Snapchat or Instagram, you know, being able to practice this and hear yourself talk back and see yourself on camera. These are the things that sometimes really, really great candidates freeze with. And it's so tough because I've sent out links for video interviews for candidates that I was so excited about on paper, and they just struggle when they get on camera. And it's like, when you freeze, you have to remember that like, there's nothing that's going to sabotage your interview quicker than your nerves. So if you're so nervous or you're so uncomfortable with being on camera, that's the one thing that I would invest in, you know, trying to work on. And the nice thing about doing a video cover letter or even a virtual resume or something and putting that on your LinkedIn, you can do takes of it, right? You can edit it. iMovie is pretty intuitive these days. I mean, if you're older or if you're not comfortable with iMovie or making these things, find a college kid, you know what I mean? Like throw them $100, like hire an intern, like whatever you need to do. But like, these are the things, even like I tell clients, I'm like, take your phone and just like selfie style, like just send a quick video, right? Like it doesn't have to be super formal. People just want to get a sense of who you are. They want to feel your personality out. I always tell people like laugh, you know, let your sense of humor come out. So I really think that the virtual component of interviews is here to stay, so much more than if COVID hadn't happened.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think it is good advice on both sides, you know, on the hiring and the job seeker side, because, you know, if everyone starts to take to take that on and make it part of their process. Like, both people need to feel comfortable doing it. And, on the employer side, build out the processes to be able to do that, 800 times a month or whatever it is that, that's a lot to kind of figure out on their end. And, on the employee side, it's like you're saying, I think it's a great idea. Like, everyone should be comfortable on camera, a little bit, because it's just, if you're not comfortable doing it, there's a Zoomer kid out there who's like, might take your job because he's like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Whatever. And they can be genuine, so I think that's a good point. And I agree with you. I think, it seems like, for example, like the last client I started working with, like everything was remote and, it was just like, cool. You guys seem cool. I seem cool. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. I mean, there's real examples of that stuff everywhere. So,
anyways,
thanks for coming on. I think we got a lot of good stuff.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, this was great. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So tell everyone where they can get a hold of you if they wanna come talk to you at JOBTALK, or just get a hold of you on LinkedIn, whatever. Like, what's the best way for people to reach out?
Yeah, sure. LinkedIn is great. I'm an equal opportunity connector, so I connect with everybody. If you send me a connection request, the website is jobtalkllc.com. And I'm on Instagram. The handle is jobtalk.llc. But it's one of those things where, if people need help, or they're in transition, or they hate their job and they're not sure how to move forward, I mean, that's kind of what I'm here for. And the majority of work that I do, even though we talked a lot about the company side today, the majority of work I do is with one-on-one job seekers. So, and most of my clients are confidentially searching, and they're kind of planning strategically that next move. It doesn't have to be necessarily like, oh my God, I got fired yesterday and I need something. I mean, it could be, but a lot of people kind of plan for the future and kind of like to get their ducks in a row. Everyone's situation is super different, but I'm all about connecting.
And I can tell you, she'll give you the time of day because she agreed to do this podcast without seeing any of the episodes or really knowing anything about it. So she definitely will give you the time of day.
I'm a team player, Dylan. I'm a team player.
Well, thanks again for coming on. I had a good time, and we'll check back in to see if your prediction of the future comes true.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Have a good one.